Good morning or afternoon. I wanted to share a little bit about the First Corinthians class that I just started teaching this week, so that if you were unable to come to the class, you could still learn a little bit about what we talked about in the class, and maybe you can come to another one or keep watching the videos as I do them every week. That way you can participate in the study even if you can't make it to the group. So the first session we talked about the first and second chapter in First Corinthians. So I want to give you a little bit of background. So the letter to the community in Corinth was written by the Apostle Paul to address some specific issues that had come up in the community. And if you've read anything in First Corinthians, it may seem like it was written as a parent chastising a child and criticizing them for all these things that they were doing wrong. But really, Paul had a bigger focus than just picking on them for all these little behaviors. The underlying theme for Paul was always about unity and love. And anything he was criticizing them for was because the community was not acting out of love and unity as they should as Christ's disciples. So that's, as we go through the study, keep that in mind throughout all the things that Paul was critical of for the people. It was all about love and unity. And if they weren't acting in Christian love toward each other, that's why he was criticizing them. And I think one of the reasons I wanted to teach this study is because I think in our community as a whole, and our country and our world, I think we can all agree we can use a little more love and unity. And hopefully we can learn some of these lessons from Paul, and we can then be Christ's vision of love and unity in our communities and spread that around the world, hopefully. So in the first century, this community in Corinth was, or the town of Corinth, was a very active seaport in Greece near Athens. And there were a variety of cultures there because of all the trade that went on. So there was a lot of different languages, different cultures, different religions. And that did cause some of the issues that they were having in this community. It was during the time that Paul was there, it was a Roman colony in Greece. So they prided themselves, though, on their Roman identity. They were very proud of their Roman identity. They also prided themselves on their intellectual life. So wisdom was very important to them, as it was in the Roman culture in general and the Greek culture. Wisdom and intelligence and all of those things were very important. And pride. Pride was an issue for the Corinthians in general. I think we can all identify with that to an extent. So Paul wrote this letter sometime between 53 and 55 AD, toward the end of his 3-year mission in Ephesus. So he was in the city of Ephesus when he wrote this letter to the Corinthians. Most of the Corinthians were not Jews. They were what would be considered pagans or Gentiles. They were not Jewish. They had been Gentiles believing in a variety of different gods and goddesses, different religions. So some of that belief carried through into their Christian life. It was hard for them to let go of some of those things and some of those behaviors and beliefs. And it was also important for Paul to get them to understand a big difference between some of their the pagan religions and the Jewish and Christian tradition. In the Jewish and Christian tradition, we have this idea that history is on this great arc, and the Bible tells the history of the world and the history of God's people, and there's a point to it. And God has been part of it throughout the whole history of the beginning of the universe till now and into the future. And we are all part of that. The people in Corinth were part of that. We are part of that. We help to tell that story of salvation. And in most of these other religions, there is not that idea of an overarching story. And so that was a new thing for this community to learn. But Paul stressed that again and again. That we're caught up in this great movement of love and power of the one true God, of our God, who came for the whole world. But again, some of that multicultural aspect in Corinth is caused some of their problems because they had different beliefs and different value systems, and there was a lot of lure of wealth. Your social status was huge there. So the social elitism that went along with that, and also rampant sexual temptations, because of some of the other pagan religions had sexual things involved with their worship and things. So that was causing problems for them in the community too. So some problems had arisen since Paul had left. He formed a church, but there were issues that have come up since he left. And so the church sent a delegation to Paul, asking him, telling him what was going on and asking him what to do. So this is actually a letter. This was a letter that Paul wrote or dictated and had delivered to the church in Corinth. And unlike what we do today, everybody didn't get a copy of the letter and just sat down at the dinner table and read it. They got this letter and gathered as a community, and somebody stood up in front and read the letter to them, just like they would have the Gospels. The Gospels are stories to be told, not really to be read. So this was read to the gathered community. So again, one of the central issues Paul's addressing is that of unity and love. But always at the heart of everything Paul does is the reality of the cross and Jesus' resurrection and what that means to us every day. And he admonishes this community to return to the gospel so that their pride is replaced with servant-hearted love and unity. So that theme will continue throughout the letter. So we started with reading chapter 1, verses 1 through 17. So you can go ahead and do that at some point. And we talked about in that section, what were the Corinthian Christians divided on, and why was that so destructive? And we talked about that they were connected to different, one was following Apollos, and one was following Paul, and one was following Cephas, and he was criticizing them for being divided over that, because it doesn't matter who baptized you or who was the leader of the church at the moment or who was teaching at the moment. They're united in Christ. And they were dividing themselves rather than being united. So some of the questions we talked about were, why is baptism so important? Because he talks about baptism and the resurrection a lot. So why was baptism important? And why did he stress that? And what is the connection between loyalty to specific leaders and potential division? How are those divisions played out? How have you seen divisions like that played out in communities you've been part of? So then we read 1:18 to 31, which also talked about some of the other divisions and things in the church, and some of the ways that they valued wisdom over everything else, and the ways that in that culture, in the Roman culture, wisdom and power were used to oppress rather than serve those who didn't have power and wealth. So he was critical of them for that. We skipped chapter 2 because that was a lot of the same kind of wise and foolishness that was in the previous section. So what does it mean to be wise and foolish in God's eyes as opposed to the world's eyes, and what does that mean for us too? So we read chapter 3, almost all of chapter 3, 1 through 9 and 16 to 23, and talking about what are some of the ways that people rank different kinds of different Christian service or gifts, like gifts of the Spirit, as more or less important, and how have you seen that played out in your congregations you've been involved in? Have you been in churches where certain gifts are considered more important than others, or not? And how has that played out? And I think, I shared, I don't see that happening at Good Shepherd really, because I think we value all gifts, because we recognize that all gifts are a gift from God, and we need all gifts to have the church function. So whether it's a visible gift of standing up in front and reading, or singing, or being in the back, cleaning up in the kitchen, or getting worship put together, or things that aren't seen. They're all equally as important to serve Christ in his church. One of the questions I think we all struggled with a little bit, and I think we should struggle with this, is too. When have you had to discard the wisdom of the world in order to be open to receive God's wisdom? So when have you had to go against what the world teaches to follow Christ? Because that's hard. Because the world teaches that, we are to depend only on ourselves. We're to take care of ourselves and nobody else. It's all about money and power and prestige, and that's not at all what Jesus was about. So how do we live in the world and still stay true to our identity as God's children? And that's a struggle every day, I think. The other thing from that section of 1 Corinthians was, if freedom from jealousy and quarreling is a mark of Christian maturity, how would you evaluate your own maturity in Christ? And some of us struggle with that too, because jealousy is big. I think that's part of human nature, that we see somebody has something that we would wish we had, or a relationship we wish we had, and so we wish away our lives and are jealous of what other people have, and not recognizing the blessings that we have. And it's not always, we think we wish we had something that someone else has, but we don't know truly, we wish we had our relationship like they had, but we don't know what their relationship is really like behind closed doors. It could be horrible. So to remember that to be mature in Christ is to recognize our own blessings. And then we concluded with something from a man named J. Thomas, which is one of the studies that I looked at to put this class together. I'm talking about unity and suffering, that he talks about striving for the crown in this life, like the culture of the world, as opposed to the cross. But he talks about how everything is about the cross and following the way of the cross. Suffering is part of following God, but eventual and eternal reward is the promise for those who follow him to the end. And he says, when people strive for the crown in this life, disunity erupts. And when believers embrace the place of suffering for the name of Christ, unity is a wonderful byproduct. So my concern with that was to share that suffering in and of itself doesn't bring glory. So to go out of your way to look for suffering is not bringing glory to Christ. Or I've heard people use that in a negative way to marginalize and oppress people. I've had women who were in abusive relationships say, well, that's my cross I bear for Christ, and that's my suffering, and it's bringing glory to God. No, it's not. God does not want us to suffer in that way. I think suffering for Christ is more, for me, along the lines of standing against culture to stand for Christ. So being the one who cares about the people who are marginalized and taking care of people and helping those and being in a relationship with people that nobody else wants to be in a relationship with, much like Jesus did in his time, can cause us to stand against our culture. And we can lose friends and family because of our beliefs, because of the way we act, because they don't agree. And that can be hard. So I think some of that suffering has to do with that. So we also talked about, from another theologian, N.T. Wright, he says, Christians are already resurrection people because of the sure hope that is theirs through the gospel. The present and future belong to them. That's how important they already are. They are assured, even while the present age is continuing, that they belong in the age to come. Nor do they belong in as extras in a script that is basically about someone else. They are the stars of the show. And I think that's important to remember, that, we're not bit players in this great story that is the arc of Jesus' story in the world from the beginning of time through now. We are major players in this story. God's salvation and God's ministry and work in the world happens through us. We make God known in the world through what we do and what we say. So in keeping with Paul, the more we act in love and unity, that shows the world what it means to be a believer and to live our life and our identity as baptized children of God by being loving to those who nobody else wants to have anything to do with, and to be in relationship with them, and to show love to people that the world thinks don't deserve it. That's love and unity in action. So I hope that we can continue to grow and learn in this together. And next week we'll be talking about chapters 4 and 5. So if you'd like to read ahead for those, and I'll have a video next week sometime too after class if you weren't able to come. So thanks for watching, and feel free to leave any comments or questions you have on the blog below the video, and I'd love to be in conversation with you as we work through this 1 Corinthians together. Blessings on your day.